Hi, this is Brian Peebles in Michigan, and I've been listening for over a year. And when I started listening, I was trying to figure out if starting a PI business was the right next move for me, and the podcast has been instrumental in moving forward with that decision. I appreciate that Matt always seems to ask his guest the exact question that I'm thinking. You know, for a veteran investigator and business owner, Matt has a great ability to think like those of us that are just starting out and ask the questions that we would want to ask. So thanks a lot, Matt, and keep it up.
The Campbell Group offers best-in-the-industry pricing, service, and coverage for private investigators. With more than 25 years of experience in the industry and over 3,000 PIs insured nationally, the Campbell team has the expertise to make sure you have the coverage you need. Submit an application and receive a quote within 24 hours. Let us know on your application that you're an Investigators Toolbox member, and you'll receive $50 off your annual premium. Are you an investigative professional with an international problem you can't solve? Conflict International has the knowledge and relationships to jump in for you. We compensate investigators for referring cases to our office. Contact us today for details. Conflict International uses insight, intelligence, investigation, risk management, and strategic solutions to solve problems troubling individuals and companies of all kinds, anywhere around the world. Whether you're planning to hire a person to a position of trust, carry out due diligence on a company, trace hidden assets, or require skilled boots on the ground, Conflict International investigators can seamlessly pursue a case across borders, offering a truly global solution. Find out about our extensive range of services at conflictinternational.com. Conflict International, global reach, international knowledge. Welcome to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Today we welcome Brian Scott, a PI and GPS guru from South Carolina. Brian runs strike investigations and also owns Position Tech GPS. GPS units are a hot topic in the investigation sector, and the guys discuss the ins and outs of how to use them, if you're allowed to in your state. Please welcome Brian Scott and your host, private investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome everyone to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. Today we're delving into the realm of GPS. I was down in Augusta, Georgia recently, and I got to meet Brian Scott. Brian works with Position Tech GPS. It's actually his baby, his little company. And I told him to come on and talk about it because there's so many misconceptions about GPS and investigations. And of course you have each state that has different rules and regulations on this stuff. So, Brian, I want to welcome you to the program. How are you?
Thank you, Matt. It's good to see you again. Thank you for inviting me on.
So folks who don't know you, tell me a little bit about where you're from and what your background is and how you got into the business.
Yeah, I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I've been a private investigator. I own Strike Investigations here in Greenville. I call it a boutique private investigator firm. I kind of purposely kept it small. And got into private investigations about 6 years ago, and since that time, developed a good following and a good background for what it takes to be a private investigator. Like you were PI of the year nationally, I believe, last year, and was awarded from the state association.
Yeah, 2021.
21. Okay,
longer. It's
yeah, I
forget
it's 2023 already. It's but yeah, then last year I was awarded the state for my state of South Carolina. So
congrats.
That's how I kind of entered into the GPS field, actually.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Very cool. So what was your background? What made you decide to become a PI?
So I came out of law enforcement. I was in law enforcement about 7 years, and that was in South Florida. So we relocated up here to Greenville, and I went into teaching for a few years, about 5 years. I taught math and science for middle school. And a friend of mine actually had hired a private investigator and got taken for a ride. And I just, gave him some advice and told him how to solve pretty much his own case. And from there, I kind of decided, I said, maybe I'm an investigator at heart. I'm an investigator in the sheriff's office. So I decided that maybe private investigations would be where I wanted to go. So spoke with a few attorneys. I heard, PIs are inconsistent. Their work products aren't consistent. Don't know if you can trust them. And like I said, my friend had got taken for a pretty good ride. He didn't even have a report yet, and it had been several months. And so anyhow, that's how I entered the field. And I try to strictly work with attorneys. I do work for some individuals, but like I said, I just try to cater to the legal field. I saw that need.
Yeah, the legal field can be very, very lucrative. I mean, 98% of my business is all working with attorneys. I like them because they pay their bills.
Yes. So, yeah, they do.
Know, and there's consistency. They come back, they're repeat clients over and over and over again. If you do a good job,
yep, they're
always going to need you. If you do a great job, which I'm sure, most of us out there are trying to do a great job on the regular John Q public, nine times out of 10, it's one and done. And, maybe you'll get a referral, hey, use this guy, used him, he was great. But there's not that guarantee. When you go and you work with personal injury attorneys or any kind of attorneys for that matter, there will be repeat business if you don't screw it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And they'll refer you to other, that's the majority. When I get phone calls, I'm like, well, how'd you hear about me? I don't do a lot of advertising, and I have a website, but it's all word of mouth and just growth from attorney referrals. I heard you from so-and-so and et cetera. So, and I'm also not afraid to turn down the work. There's just something I don't feel comfortable taking, or just outside my resources or ability. I tell them, and then I'll find them somebody who does that. So, which is, something I also do that I think a lot of people don't. So I think in this business, same within the GPS business, it's all about your resources and who you know, and so kind of those situations where I'm like, well, this is outside my realm, but I know somebody who does what you're looking for, and I'm not afraid to throw them that bone. I think a lot of people are afraid because they're like, well, that person's gonna steal my business, and that I don't. I think you do what's right for the customer, and that's what I've always tried to do. What's good for the client. I'm not going to experiment on your money. So,
as my good buddy Jim Nanos likes to say, it's always better to know the guy than be the guy.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, it's always better to know the guy than be the guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and at the end of the day, I mean, when you're in the service industry, making sure your client has good service is basically what you're supposed to do. And, and when you build that network, that community, you'll get business back from that person you send business to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Then you start talking about referral fees and stuff like that. It starts getting a little funny. So you got to be careful of that too.
I don't, you know what, when I refer out cases, I never ask for anything in return. Not even a thank you. I mean, I get them, but I'll call up somebody and say, hey, are you interested in taking this? But if I already know that person does that, then I'll say, hey, this is your guy. I do that a lot with domestics. I don't work domestic cases anymore.
Yeah, me neither.
I stopped for a while and I went back into domestics, and then I completely cut them back off again. And a lot of it has to do with the GPS tracking.
Yeah.
But I don't. So I get a lot of phone calls still from past clients or attorneys that didn't realize I kind of got out of this. And so I refer them to people I know that will, in their area, that will do a good job. And so that's just, and like you said, referral fees, I don't ask for them. So I tell them, man, buy me a drink or something, or shake my hand and send me a nice Christmas gift. And so that's about it. Treat people good, even your coworkers and even your people, just treat people good.
So, I mean, you're obviously in the GPS game, and every state is different in
they are
what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. So if you're listening to this program and you're thinking about buying units and getting all set up and all that, just check your laws in your state and make sure that you're allowed to do what you want to do and all that. I know the Carolinas are free game. You can go crazy over there.
Yeah, not
kind of
really, but within reason. Yeah. You can get yourself in trouble, but but as licensed investigators, we have more, I think, more leeway than with other states. A lot more states are restrictive
Right.
and in South Carolina. So
I love watching the message boards when people are asking for like creative ways to put, batteries or units, like, would I got so and so type of vehicle, where would you recommend putting a tracker on? Like you see that stuff all the time. It's all
yeah,
trial and error.
yeah, you get asked by clients too. You're like, nah, I can't tell you.
Right.
So
Right.
they want to be a part of it, especially if it gets found. And like, well, who told you to put it there? So
I remember watching some sort of documentary, and it wasn't GPS. It was a bug. It was a listening bug. Like they were putting it in the car radio, and it was a matter of like, excuse me, this was like the federal government that was doing this. So they created a problem with the car that it had to go to the shop. And once the car got in the shop, they were able to stick in the radio, and it was like a whole big mess. But then the car ended up dying.
oh.
And like they were taking it to a different dealership to get fixed. I think that was the story. It was going to a different dealership, and they're like, "Oh man, we have this like car that's going to somewhere where there's something in the car that's not supposed to be in the car," and they were worried about somebody finding it. And they got like another police agency to pull the car over, or pull over the truck that was flatbedding the car with the device in it to the dealership, and they were able to like circumvent and figure out a way to get to that the car did not end up there. I'm totally butchering the story, but
No, that's all right.
something
No, I
weird
understand
like
what you're
that,
saying.
like oh crap, man, there's something in this car that shouldn't be there, and if it gets where it's going, like it can completely tip off. In this case, it was a mobster. That they were
Oh, right. Yeah.
going to be doing things. So good times.
Yeah. And at our last conference, I was speaking to somebody and they had told me that their husband works at a dealership and they've been told if you find a device on a vehicle, don't say anything.
Yeah, just leave
You
it.
don't know. You don't know if it's
Yeah.
from the federal local police or federal government, or if that person put it on there, or they're like, just mind your own business. And that was the first time I had heard that. And because as PI, I've certainly seen my fair share of vehicles go to the shop. And one of my clients had a Mercedes, and his wife went to a little tire place, and I see it up on the lift, and I'm looking underneath, and I called him and said, "Where do you get your car serviced?" And he's, "Why?" I said, "Where does it get serviced at?" And he's, the Mercedes dealership here in town. And I said, "Any reason why it's at this facility?" And he's like, "No." So I knew that they were looking for a device, and it was actually ultimately his neighbor, who told his neighbor. His neighbor told his wife told her, and they never found it. But but people do that. They go into shops looking for these things. So
yeah, it's crazy.
Got to hide them good.
Unless it's ticking. If the device is ticking when you see it, you should probably say something to somebody.
Yeah, probably safe to leave it alone. Luckily, mine don't tick. But
yeah, that's cool. It's interesting stuff. Being out of New York, we really can't do it, so I really don't know too much about it. But I see those other states. It's a very useful tool for investigators for all different types of investigations. So what do you typically see it used for?
Domestic cases, primarily. Child custody would fall under domestics. So with the domestic, as our private investigators watching know, you're going to have cheating spouses. In the state of South Carolina, not all states are like this, but in the state of South Carolina, proving infidelity or adultery can be very good for the client. It's going to help bar that other spouse from spousal support. It's going to help with the speed along. In South Carolina, you'll have to be separated for 12 months, but if the person is caught in infidelity, that speeds things up. It could be as fast as 90 days. So, so in this state, I know others, it's not like that. There's, you can have one partner cheating and the state doesn't weigh that decision any in the courts. But in South Carolina, we see a lot of that. So with domestic cases, infidelity, child custody cases, trackers get put on. That's primarily the most that we do and see. Or very rarely, but it does happen, would be employee. If somebody thinks their employees having misconduct, or I've had this happen before. Somebody taking their vehicles, company vehicles, mostly construction or trade, and using them on the weekends and or harming that business somehow.
Right.
So,
Right. If
but
they're
they
a
want to talk
trade
to
going
them.
out and working on the weekends as a, for themselves using,
Yeah. Yeah.
a company vehicle to do that. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I remember when I was in, just out of college, I think, so in the mid 90s, I was working for a party rental company as a driver, just setting up tents for stuff. And, all of a sudden one day the boss is like, yeah, we have these new units that we're putting in all the trucks,
Yeah.
and they have mapping in them, so it's like, can help you get where you need to go. Oh, and by the way, they'll tell us where you're at all times, and we'll know how long you're on the job for, how long it took you to do this one thing, and we'll know precisely exactly where you are at all times. This is
Yeah.
And there was no choice as to whether or not we wanted to have it in the truck. It was going in the truck, and it had like a CB radio attached to it, so you could speak to the office without having to call in. That was cool. But yeah, we had no choice. So
Yeah. No, and and I think almost all 50 states you're allowed to track your own personal property. It just
right.
becomes the gray line. It comes when you have drivers or other people driving that vehicle, and that's where every state is different.
Yeah.
But yeah, and mostly, like I said, that you've got so many different realms with the GPS and so many different devices out there.
Right.
The possibilities are really endless.
Yeah, and even like before they had GPS, I had working for a retail investigation company. I had a lot of retail clients, and one of our clients was we had two different ones. One was a lumber delivery company, and the other was a plumbing supply company. And we would regularly survey the workers to see what they were doing with their day. And I remember like there was one guy this one time, he literally pulled over the side of the road. He had a big box truck, right? So he pulls over the box truck. He opens the back gate and he pulls out a lawn chair. And then he climbs up to the top of the box truck and he puts the lawn chair on top of the box truck and is literally sunning himself for a couple hours. I was like, that is gutsy, man. That guy, pretty amazing.
No, and that happens.
Right.
I just recently spoke with somebody who was the local company here, and they were seeing theft out of a truck, believe it or not. When it was getting to the destination, the counts were different. And rather than have a long-term tracker on those trucks, which they don't now do, but they were like, what's happening between A and B? So you either have somebody who's fudging reports, putting gizmos into trucks and marking 100 when there's not, or it's the driver, or it's the other distribution. And they found that the truck was diverting off of its route, stopping, and that's where the product was disappearing and then continuing. So there's all sorts of, like you said,
for these stuff falls off of trucks all the time.
Right, especially when they stop and open the back,
So I feel like it's like the Goodfellas, right? You walk in the restaurant and there's like 40 mink coats sitting in the freezer of a restaurant. Stuff happens.
Stuff happens.
Exactly. So all right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to hammer down a little more on GPS and investigations, and maybe some misconceptions on what investigators believe the units can do, or what they can do, can't do, that kind of stuff. So everybody sit tight, and we will be right back.
Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. Are you in the New York metro area and are looking for work? Satellite Investigations is currently looking for a full-time field investigator. Visit Matt's profile on LinkedIn for more details and the links in the show notes. Good luck. Do you enjoy our podcast and the guests we bring you? Since 2019, Matt and his team have done their very best to give you amazing shows each week. If you feel like our show has helped you to be a better investigator, or maybe even inspired you to become an investigator, please let us know. We're looking for testimonials. Drop Matt an email with a recorded 20 to 30 seconds of you talking about this podcast. You can also email him something verbal about the website. His email is matthews@satellitepi.com. And if you really feel blessed for having this content, consider supporting Matt and our show by joining Investigators Toolbox. You really have to see version 2.0. And at just 49 cents a day, it's a no-brainer.
Welcome back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. We're here with Brian Scott from Position Tech GPS. Brian, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. So we're talking all things GPS today. And, before we took the break, I wanted to, I said we're going to talk about like some misconceptions. And I think there are 3 really good points that I'd like to cover here today. The first is about all platforms being the same. I think that's a misconception where people think, every unit works and operates the same way. So tell me a little bit about that point.
Yeah, and I think when people look at a GPS, their first instinct is, oh, well, they're all the same. They're all mapped, and they all have these little dots or an arrow or something that moves on the screen and tells me where it is. But they don't look at the complexity behind it and what that entails. So, what I usually tell people is that, yes, a GPS device kind of similar. They are similar. They are the same. But on the back end is where all your differences are gonna happen. So for my platform, I've simplified the user as much as I can because, yeah, you're right. It's some of these turn people loose, and you're looking at a bunch of screens and a bunch of bars and a bunch of features, and you're like, oh my gosh. When the average person just wants to know, where's my stuff, and how do I maybe change the ping rate on this? And for investigators like ourselves, and this is where I think, when I started this business, it was to come up with a device or a platform. I'm sorry, not a device, but that was, accurate, reliable, and affordable. So, and with that, I've been working on this for 3 years and perfecting it. So, and even sent things out to different PIs, and that's the problem that kept coming up. So what I've done is I've simplified to make things as user-friendly as I can with a minimal learning curve. So for instance, for PIs, I have pre-configured reports. They're already done for you. You just go in there and you put the tracker, put the dates, hit export, it'll put it into a PDF. That's where you have to choose Excel, multiple different file formats. But that report is already built for you because with the other platforms I've used, I'm like, oh, how do I build a report again? I can't remember, So, and by all means, in my platform, you can even make your own reports and configure everything you want. But I just know what PIs want, and I've done that for them.
Right.
And the alerts, that's another hard part for people to learn is configuring the alerts. They think that that's a huge learning curve, but it's mostly already done for you. For me, you just go in, I've pre-configured alerts. You hit copy. All you got to do is pick your tracker and just, set your geofence to where your location is. You have to do that yourself, but that's easy. The other thing is user accounts. I always had a hard time with user accounts. If I had a case go out of state, which they commonly do, and you have to have somebody assist you coming up with a user account and tying it together. And even though you use them for a period of time, you forget if you're not doing it daily. So I've pre-configured those. Every one of my accounts has pre-configured user accounts. All you got to do is tell the person, here's your username and here's the login, and it's in there.
So let's talk real quickly about going into different states, because that bears a question here, right? So let's say if you've got a tracker active and you're in a state that you're permitted to be, you use it. Mm-hmm. Now all of a sudden, your target there decides he wants to go for tacos the state over. Like what happens there? What do you do?
Well, if it's close, we in South Carolina here we have reciprocity with other states, but I've had them go into I've had them go all over. But for instance, somewhere close by would be Atlanta, and I've had them go to Atlanta. We're 2 hours away, from Atlanta, and I'm not a licensed private investigator in Georgia. So for those cases, I've hired people who are licensed in Georgia, and that's where your network comes in. I mean, all PIs.
Yeah. I mean, but at that point, you're going to be in Georgia, so you prearrange it. I'm talking like on the fly, like you're just tracking it, and all of a sudden, like, where's he going?
No, that's what I mean. I've had them go from South Carolina into Georgia. I've had them leave from here and go up to Ohio.
Yeah.
And they move. I mean, and obviously North Carolina, and but the device was placed on here, and this is where the person lives. So, I'm not an attorney.
Right. This is not legal advice, people. Please.
That's right. Not legal advice. No, none. But
that's Brian, BRI.
Yeah, right. But yet, in these in private investigations, that tracker's placed on in South Carolina, and it diverts from here. We've had them go to Florida before, and Florida is one of those states where regulated with GPS trackers, and not a lot of PIs use them in the state of Florida.
I would assume, and again, I'm not an attorney, I would assume that if you set up a tracker in a state where it's allowed, and that vehicle ends up in a state where they're not allowed, that whatever data points are collected in the state it's not allowed probably are not admissible, I would guess. Is that true, or you have no idea?
I'll tell you this: I've handed over data to attorneys for their court cases, and it's been out of state. It's never even been mentioned. It was never a problem. Yeah. And I assume, again, I'm not an attorney, but I assume that's because the case originated out of South Carolina, where the tracker was placed on legally, and just because the vehicle happened to go across state lines or numerous state lines, that didn't affect the outcome. And so, but every state, you're right, every state is truly different in the way that those trackers are. And I think a lot of what, if you look at the state laws, it's not really on the use, it's on putting the tracker onto the vehicle. And that's what sense. Yeah, I mean, like I said,
the act of applying it,
is legal advice. But if you look at, one of the things we do, one of the things I did in law enforcement a lot was look at state statutes. And then when you look as a private investigator, you're always, I run a lot of FOIAs. So, and if I have to contest one, I always know my state statute to go to. So, and so you read these things, and it basically kind of, I think the majority of them cover the use of it and putting it onto a vehicle. But the main state where they come out of would be South Carolina, where it is illegal. So, and they've ventured, like I said, all over. These things, you'd be surprised where they end up, and quickly. And and I've had people leave. You think they're going to work 11 o'clock at night because they're firefighters or law enforcement, and next day you take a look and you're like, what? They're 2-3 states north, and so that does happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm sure you've seen a few things. So the units you sell, you sell them, or do you rent them? Like how does that? What's the
I don't rent them. Yeah, I don't.
Do people do that? Do they rent stuff out, or is it pretty much always just sold?
I've seen private investigators, and I've seen them online also, where they rent you a device. I'm not in the rental market. I mean, I have a retail sales license. Physician tech is totally different from my investigative business. Right. And some, PIs, I guess they could choose to rent them out, but in this state, you would need to have a retail sales license if you rent the device. So you'd have to steer, that navigation as far as charging sales taxes and stuff like that. But for me particularly, I just sell the devices to the end user. The end user is mostly either going to be a private investigator. I've tailored my system for private investigators. Mm-hmm. I do sell units to non-private investigators, and I would be dumb not to. But the majority and the complexity of the system is designed for PIs. We just talked about coming out of state lines. Mm-hmm. One of the things I did in my platform, because I've learned these lessons, and I said, I need to do this. And I actually had a case where a guy, I thought he was going to work, and I got a geofence going off at 11 p.m. And I'm like, oh, he's a firefighter, no big deal. That's when he goes to work. 10:45, 11 o'clock, he's leaving for work, and he's got several days off. And I know his car's gonna be parked there for 24 hours. To my surprise, the next day, and you look at the screen, you're like, oh my gosh, he's 2 states north already. So now I've developed in my platform, pre-configured all 50 states that have geofence boundaries. So the entire state's a geofence, and I've pre-configured those. And that goes back to the platforms all being the same. No, the backends are what are different. So now, I have it set up where you can have South Carolina as a geofence, and when they exit South Carolina, it's going to tell you, like, exiting South Carolina. This particular person went to Ohio, so I had a PI in Ohio using the platform, and I knew they were coming and going from their rental, and that was fine. I'm not working that case. That gentleman was for me, and he had those geofences set up. But what I was concerned with, I put a geofence around Ohio because I want to know when he's coming back, so I can set up my cameras where I found, Paramore's car park. So, those are little things that being a PI has helped me with the platform. But no, I sell the devices outright. I don't rent them. And then, when you buy a tracker from me, you're buying the full device, and that's yours. So,
excuse me. So how about another one about them being complicated, right? That's a misconception about how difficult they are to use, right?
It goes back to the platform. How difficult. I also have a YouTube channel. I try to make like 5-minute little quick videos.
What's the channel? Give me a plug.
Just Position Check GPS on YouTube.
Okay.
It's not edited. I probably would like to get the name of your editor. Mine is
he's editing
rough.
this right now going, hey, give him the name.
Yeah, it's kind of
Joey Salvia. There you go, Joey. JoeySalvia.com.
Yeah, they're little screen grabs, screen recordings. It's mainly out there. When you activate, I give you an activation sheet with your account, and that goes over email. And it has the YouTube channel on there, and it's just basically quick tutorials. Nobody wants to watch a 10, 15-minute video, so I just do simple little things like creating geofences or creating notifications, just to help people out and realize how fast it is. The average learning curve is really quick, and like I said, I've simplified as much as I can for people and done as much as I can on the back end to make it a very user-friendly system. So even down to the user accounts, they're pre-configured. If you need more, give me a call. I'll add more in there, and I'll do the back end work for you, just to try, because as PIs, we're busy people, and juggling cases, and it's and I even tell clients, they're like, well, I got to train my coworkers, and I'm like, leave that on me. I'll do it. I can do Zoom meetings and just show everybody at one time, or even create videos for you, or guide you to the videos.
So the trial and error that you were talking about over the years of your experience in doing this, like, how have you seen the environment change as far as technology goes? Like, what are some things that are new now that you didn't have when you first started, and you're like, wow, man, this was a game changer that they added this particular function to the unit? Yeah,
and the devices are ever changing.
Right.
One of the things is the cellular technology is changing. They've dropped 2G, they dropped 3G, or it's pretty close to being dropped, and now you're moving into 5G. But 5G is a lower spectrum, so 4G is going to be around for quite a while. But these devices now, the newest devices are going to be 4G, LTE, Cat-M devices, and then the features. Some of the newest features coming out are now Wi-Fi positioning. So if you're using these indoors, and then we could have a whole conversation about how they get your Wi-Fi position. the little car that drives around taking photos of streets, integrated into that. But one of the things that, like I said, I've been doing this, 3 years. I ran, before I launched Position Tech, it ran with my PI company, and so I kind of saw some changes, and one of the newest changes, and I have 2 trackers that do it, are turn-by-turn updates. So as PIs, that's, a game changer, I think, in my opinion. If you're the PI that's out there and you're like, oh, I got a tracker moving, and it's going where think it's going, and I need to be there, waiting for a dot on a map to move. I'll tell you, Matt, I know you don't, I guess you guys don't use them in New York, but when you're behind a car, and the two things that happen is the latency when we're talking about platforms being the same, there's a lot that goes into this. And sometimes it's the latency, the data from where the tracker gives it to the cell tower gives it to the server directs it back to either your cell phone or your web platform, and it has to move fast. Some aren't very fast, some are slower. But if you're waiting for a ping to go off and that person takes an exit and you go straight, and I've been in that situation, not on my platform, but on others, and
lag kills you, right?
oh yeah, you're like, oh, especially if you have those spaghetti junctions where these interstates are turning and twisting and going straight, so you can get on the wrong one. And so the turn by turn is a game changer, and I have two trackers that do that. And not a lot of companies, I think, want to give you turn by turn updates because it's all about data. Sure. These are cellular devices. They work off of a SIM card. Every single device has a SIM card. And when you have a SIM card, it's almost like a mobile phone. And these are cellular devices. And a lot of companies worry about their data cost. And I get that. I try to come in and change the game. As a small little company, I try to come in and change the game a little bit on the way things are done.
So how does that base? Yeah, let's talk about that for a bit. So you buy the unit, right? What are the other costs that are involved after you've purchased the unit?
Yeah, so I buy the unit. The units come from a distributor or the manufacturer directly. I have manufacturer. Some manufacturers you can buy directly from. Others you've got to go through a distributor. So I primarily deal with two companies, Quaylink and Micron. I like both of their devices. So, essentially you get a blank device. You'll get a device in a box, and the rest is up to you. And these are almost, they're all configured differently. So every GPS platform is going to configure theirs differently. And what people don't realize, I think, goes into these there's IP addresses that have to be entered. So for your servers, no matter what GPS company you are, you have a different server address. A port number for the device. It's very specific to the individual device because of the way the information is parsed from the device. So no two devices are going to have the same. Well, I shouldn't say that. Not every model is going to have their own port, but two models are different. Right. So a Micron and a Quaylink, or even two different Quaylink devices, are going to have different ports because of the way the information is provided to the server is different. Okay. Then the SIM card. The SIM cards is the data provider, essentially. And you've got numerous out there, of course, all the big network carriers of the SIM cards. For me, I use a multi-carrier SIM. So rather than just one, I don't like to rely on one cellular company because, for instance, in some areas, AT&T might be fantastic here, but you go into another area and they might not be very fantastic, and another carrier might. So, these are all kind of things you got to deal with. So, yeah, buying them out of a box, you're just getting a blank. It's not going to work until you program it. And there's a whole programming special cable that comes with them, and special programs that you plug. I have a laptop that is just for programming GPS trackers.
That makes sense. So, have you ever seen any of these trackers? I mean, you must have seen them kind of sunset out as the technology changes. An investigator now has to take this old unit that's pretty much useless now and make a new investment. Have you seen stuff like that happen or no?
Yeah, no. Especially with the sunset of the 2G, they're 2G stuck around a lot longer, just because there was so much on it. And it's finally been sunsetted. So, yeah, there are a lot of people. I think as private investigators, we look at these as tools. You don't, I mean, when I first had my first GPS devices, you always wanted to get them back. You're like, that's mine. That's my property. I need it back. But yeah, after like the third time, you're just, you look at them as just a tool.
Exactly. Right. You stop naming them, right? When you name them, it's real.
Yeah. That's right.
I lost George again. Damn it.
You're like, that was my favorite one. And that's happened before. I'm like, that was my favorite one. And then, sometimes you just have so many on the shelf. And I think you got to look at it as and this is how I looked at it when like I said, when you first start, you're like, oh, geez, these things are expensive. But ideally it's a tool. And that tool helps you do your job, and it makes you do your job more efficiently.
What's typically
in the end, it helps the client because you're not burning up hours. You're waiting for a tractor to go off, so.
What's typically the turnaround time from somebody ordering a unit through you to you delivering in the unit?
Yeah, and it depends on distance, obviously. So locally, within North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, I ship UPS. So I can get them, if you get the order in before about 5 o'clock. I'm sorry, 4 o'clock. If you get it in before 4 o'clock, I can try to make the last drop off at the UPS center, which isn't too far. So within this little region that I live in here in the Southeast, it's next day delivery. They even deliver on Saturdays. I have one going out tomorrow in the state of South Carolina, and it's going to be delivered tomorrow. So those are 2 tractors in the box and a battery.
That's awesome.
And they go, yeah. And then for customers on the West Coast, I try, I don't charge. I do free shipping. Now, if you need it expedited overnight, then obviously that's something I have to charge you for. But I always try to accommodate because I know the shipping times are longer between east to west. Yeah. So I try to get it there as fast as I can within a few days. I'm not paying for the slowest shipping, but I can't pay for the fastest shipping that overnight because that's more than the tractor itself. But and like what any business does, you look at who can provide you the best cost. And I've been through several shipping different platforms, and I finally found one that I really like, and the prices are reasonable, and it allows me multiple options of carriers rather than just 1 or 2. So I try to use FedEx or UPS as much as I can for speed.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're going to wind down here. Brian, thank you so much for coming on. This was great. Just getting a little taste of the GPS world. Again, not my forte, but I'm always interested in learning more about this stuff. If folks wanted to get a hold of you, learn more about this, what's your website and how they get a hold of you?
Yeah, positiontechgps.com, and on the website has all the plan features and the trackers that I offer. And I'm always trying to bring in something new. I test everything out months at a time to make sure they work and they're, good quality devices. There's a lot of devices out there that unfortunately aren't.
Yep. Always important. So, all right. Thank you everyone for checking the show out, and we'll be back next week with another show. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Thanks for checking out this week's show. Very interesting topic. Make sure you check your local state laws before you deploy any of this technology. Thanks to Campbell Insurance Group for sponsoring the show. And remember to tell them you listen to the show to save $50 when you apply for insurance. And thanks also to the PI Institute for Education, Conflict International, and Satellite Investigations for sponsoring this show. And don't forget about investigatorstoolbox.com. You can type in version 2.0 25% to save $50 when you join. If you have a question or a comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We'd like your feedback to bring you the best shows possible in the future, and we'll be back next week for a new show. So make sure you tune in and stay safe out there.